Let's see, everyone. We've got a quorum here. So call the meeting to order at 7:06. Do we have a volunteer to take minutes?
I can. You just give me a second to set up here, but I can do that.
Okay, thank you, Joe. Welcome, Eric.
7:06, you said, right?
7:06.
All right.
So we've got 6 members of 8 at the moment, so we've got a quorum. And heard from a couple of people that they have other commitments that they are unable to join us this evening. These things do happen. In addition, Attorney Bobrowski also was busy this evening, and until it looks like a couple hours ago, there was a conflict that existed. So as we get into things, we'll give that quick update. Tom, I'll let you give the update since you have more details on that. So in the actual agenda, we've got the call to order, public engagement. Tom, if you'd like to say something as a member of the public, or if anyone else wants to, you're welcome to. Otherwise, next thing up is the minutes from September 18th that Ann took. Do we have a motion to approve the minutes as presented?
So moved.
Okay, Ann makes the motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
Seconded by Eric. Got that, Joe?
Yes.
Excellent. Okay, so motion made by Ann, seconded by Eric. Any comments on the minutes? Going once, going twice. Okay, with that, and Tom, we've lost your video feed here. We'll want you back in a moment here. Okay, with that, the only other steps after approval is I put a footer on the bottom of the minutes, and then I send them off to the town clerk as well as the town administrator so that they can get posted. So those are the pieces that happen. Okay, seeing no further comments, we will take a vote. All votes are done by roll call, and we'll do it in the order in which I see you on my screen. So Joe, you're first.
Yes.
Lucy.
Yes.
Tim.
Yes.
Ann.
Yes.
Eric.
Yes.
And I will vote in the affirmative, so we have a unanimous vote. Okay, so those are approved. Excellent. That brings us to an update on legal counsel. Tom, if you're able to present the information that you had just sent prior to the meeting itself.
Yes, so as you may remember, Attorney Bobrowski had a legal or ethical issue because his partner, Paul Haverty, had signed on to represent Scott Green in connection with a 40B project before the town of Wakefield. This presented a possible conflict of interest under the state ethics law and a certain issue under the rules of professional responsibility that bind all lawyers. So he and I worked together and came up with a document that he proposed to the town council last night. I recommended that they sign it. It was an acknowledgement of the apparent conflict and a waiver of it, as well as a determination that anyone recodifying our zoning bylaws would be retained as a special municipal employee. That lowers considerably the impact of the state ethics law on anybody in that position. So with that, it's his view and mine that he is free to work with the committee in the future. And as you've heard, he's not here tonight only because he had another engagement.
So thank you for the explanation. So we are able to go forward with it. I did talk briefly with Attorney Bobrowski, and what we did discuss were 2 items. One is that he has taken time to go ahead and prepare additional chapters. He will send those to us. Now, my guess is that he didn't receive the letter from Attorney Mullen until after he left for the day. So I can expect that we'll probably get those tomorrow or Thursday. And I will send those to the committee and have those chapters posted as drafts for others, because we want to give the public and those who are interested as much opportunity to opine on this. In addition, the subgroup will go ahead. We will schedule meetings for the subgroup to review different pieces as well. So particularly focusing on definitions and so forth. The smaller group, which is designed to take an initial pass of items, but not make any final determinations. All final determinations are made by this group and then get passed on to town council. But smaller group has not met yet. As we were getting ready to, we learned about the conflict with Attorney Bobrowski, and that kind of put a halt to things for that. So the meeting, given the scheduling of the various items and where things are, the meeting that we're going to plan to resume the detailed coverage of the general meeting will probably be November 20th, which will be the second meeting in November as currently planned. So he does have that available. Monday nights seem to be very popular amongst municipal boards to grab his time. So, but November 20th is available, so that's when he will be joining us at this particular meeting. So in terms of things to plan for. So you'll may have noticed on the agenda that is listed as next meeting. We'll have a discussion in a little bit as if we want to have a meeting in between them, which we certainly can. Okay. That also for zoning, the next steps, in terms of what's been going on with zoning, the answer is honestly not much because of that. This will probably put a slight delay into the presentation. So I do not think at this point anything will be ready of substance from our committee directly for next spring. There may be a bylaw, and likely to be a bylaw on Chapter 3A, which is state law, MGL 3A, or Section 3A, that covers the MBTA communities overlay requirement. That will probably come to us from the planning board sometime in the next month or 2 months, maybe 3 months. It should come to us for our review by January. So the idea behind this is that we don't have, again, final determination. It's going to be presented by the planning board, but they have asked us to opine on it. If there are any suggestions or improvements, we'll work with them on that. And again, also work with Attorney Bobrowski, because it'll then get built into the recodified version as well. So it hasn't been adopted yet. So until there's an adoption, the idea is to do it in the current style and then reorganize it as necessary. Any questions on those pieces? So just to give updates on some of the stuff that's been happening behind the scenes, so to speak. No decisions have been made. The idea is just to keep everyone informed as to what's happening and to promote collaboration amongst boards. With that, we have actually only a couple of existing bylaws left. It's kind of exciting that we're just about through with the main bylaws and at least making a first pass. So I'm going to bring those up. Okay, is everyone able to see my screen?
Yes.
Yep.
Excellent. And just adjusting things over here so I can see everyone as well. But for those of you who work with Zoom regularly, if you have multiple screens, you can actually have both participants and screen sharing and show what's going on at the same time on different screens. Okay, so for this, in addition to the to the changes that we've recommended so far, and there are a few changes that we've asked town council to look at and get back to us on. There are a few open issues. So I did hear back earlier today from the DPW and engineering. They're going to have recommendations for chapter 170, as we discussed at the last meeting, for storm drain system and stormwater management. The storm is coming of changes that are being recommended, but they're not ready yet. So that will be ready probably for our next meeting, is the current expectation, whether that's in later in October or in November. The current plan is to have those changes. And there may also be changes to water. Chapter 190 on zoning, deliberately skipping over here since we're talking about that separately. That brings us to the last two of the general bylaws that are existing, chapters 191 and 192. Scenic roadways, which is 191. It's an old bylaw from 2003, not one of the originals, but fairly old. And this is to try and, as it says, maintain the natural, historic, and scenic character of the town's roadways. Please note, this does not say maintain the potholes. Given everything that's been happening in town recently, I did actually check this bylaw and made sure it does not say maintain current condition. The idea is that the condition will improve. What is important in here is the real purpose of this is to maintain the character of the town's roadways. Some can be designated as scenic roads, and anything that is done with this is not changed without a public hearing. And I anticipate that this really was done to protect areas around Lake Quantapowhat and some of the other areas that are deemed scenic in town. So there are some areas, some components of this that will limit what can be done on those roadways. As with a lot of the existing bylaws, there's some unique definitions. Removal of trees. The only person who is permitted to make a decision is the tree warden. That would be Dennis Favey at the moment. And any work that's done is permitted as long as it takes place within the right of way. The actual criteria that's used to determine what's a scenic road, the overall scenic beauty, may be in the eye of the beholder, contribution of trees, stone walls, age, and significance. And then if there's anything along that, and you'll notice some things that seem to be very specific around the lake, things such as historic buildings, monuments, historic burial grounds, etc. Roads features such as historic layout. Again, old roads and anything that has historic value. So scenic roads, if there is a designation, the change here really was just for town council from Board of Selectmen. When you see something that is amended by that particular article, that's what it's referring to. And it goes to several of the different boards, planning board, town council, Concom, and historical commission. They can propose a scenic road. Tom, do you know if there are any scenic roads currently that have actually been formally designated?
No, I don't know.
Okay, I'm not aware of any that has happened, because what happens is that it then goes before town meeting, and then town meeting, and this does require a supermajority vote for the designation.
Dan,
Yes.
this article or previous similar one was presented to town meeting slightly before the change of the millennium, and it was voted to take down the specific ones that were mentioned. And the example mentioned was essentially Common Street. Sorry, Church Street. So that's a history behind this.
Okay.
It's there if we ever want to do it.
Which
Or name a particular region to be, for this to apply to. Over and out.
So thank you. And
Dan,
once,
I'm
yeah.
sorry, can I jump in for a second?
Sure.
If you scrolled up, the commissioners, Middlesex County commissioners no longer exist. They were eradicated in 1998 and assumed, state authority assumed all of their duties. So there are no commissioners in Middlesex County.
Tom, do you know if this was designed to replicate a state law? Just the way that it reads, it looks like it may have been built on a state law.
Yeah, I think so. I think there's a state enabling act that this mirrors. And Ann's certainly right. I think there are counties in Massachusetts that retain their vitality, but Middlesex County is not one of them.
So, and I'm not sure if it appears that this is a directory type of notification as opposed to mandatory. So I don't think it would actually invalidate the componentry of it. That's my take on this.
Makes sense. Yep.
So once there is this designation, and I suspect that this was part of a movement that has happened about every 10 to 15 years to designate a historical district in the town and have protection. Just in reading through this, it appears that this is in the same light as some of those movements, none of which have passed town meeting thus far. So there's a hearing. It's got specific timing on the hearing itself. Shall be held within 30 days of receipt and shall make a decision within 45 days. If there is consideration, planning board should take several different things into consideration specifically so that there is a aesthetic and a specific consideration. It's not based upon just desire or political components. There's rationale in what gets designated as a scenic roadway. As I read it, the real teeth of this and the purpose of it is actually in the enforcement. It's really about trees and walls. It's to make sure that anything that is designated doesn't actually have problems. There have been a few instances, not many, but a few instances of people destroying trees in areas that are protected on the public way and so forth. And at the moment, there isn't much that is typically done to people that are actually found, unless they're found in the process of cutting down a tree. So here it would be allowed to actually have full replacement and have it done as a civil matter instead of just a criminal matter. It would be much harder to prosecute. You don't actually have an eyewitness or other witness as to what is happening with a particular tree. But we have had trees girdled and damaged in other ways. So as I see it, that's part of the purpose of this. Similarly, destroying stone walls and so forth. Again, there are some around Lake Quantapowhat. We do have stone walls around some other roadways. There's some on Main Street as well.
Yeah, and as background, during my tenure, I think the fine was close to $10,000 when someone cut down a tree along Crystal Lake. Several, it's not a tree, several trees.
That was several trees. That was
intentional. Yes.
Right. That was different than the 1 to 2 trees that we've seen, particularly around Lake Quantapowhat.
Sure.
Different issue. And I do remember Crystal Lake. That was more of a clearing effort than anything else, and that was very unfortunate destruction. I'm not sure that this would have actually had much impact on that because I'm not sure that Crystal Lake would have been designated on a byway, especially where that, as I recall, the area of trees wasn't actually close to the road.
I think it was, but no, it's probably we didn't go under. I don't think we went under this part. But yeah, just for people to know that we take our trees seriously in town.
So I'm not sure if there's anything in here that really needs to be changed offhand, just because this seems to be a bylaw that's here kind of as a placeholder in case there is further action. The only potential change that I would put in for consideration as I read through this is the potential change to having a supermajority vote by town meeting, since that is an aberration from other items and including most of the zoning components. But where this hasn't actively been used, I don't actually have a problem leaving it either. I just wanted to bring up, that's just one of the items that I looked at and said, okay, for consistency's sake, there is a difference here. Otherwise, the different pieces of this are in here. I wasn't sure if we need to have an item in the penalties that specifically says this can be subject of non-criminal disposition, but my understanding is that the general definition that allows for any civil components, I think would cover this one as well. Tom, is that accurate? If this were actually enforced?
I think that's right.
Comments, thoughts? Going once, going twice. Moving along, chapter 192, relatively new bylaw. This is from 2020. Sustainable food containers and packaging. It was originally came up in 2019, I believe, or 2018. And this is sometimes referred to as the plastic bag bylaw, but it affects more than plastic bags. The idea behind this is to prohibit polystyrene, sometimes known as styrofoam, and packaging that is done in ways that have extensive capability for waste. So styrofoam is known to have harmful effects on the environment. Having thin single film bags, similarly, they don't degrade quickly. And so this is a fairly new bylaw. And again, it's got the basis of definitions. And then the prohibitions. The effective date has already taken effect. I don't think there's any reason to change that because it just shows when it went into effect. At some point, that sentence could be removed if this section were to get rewritten, because it's obviously already in effect, but I don't think there's a problem with leaving that. I don't see it causing any issues. And I'm not aware that there's any waivers still in effect because we're well beyond the timing for this. The idea of the fines, there is a potential conflict in here that is not unique to this provision, which is how you document a first offense of being a warning to then be able to escalate to a second offense of a fine. If it's a warning before you can get to a fine, you actually would have to have something that enforces it and allows it to be challenged. Otherwise, someone could say a second offense is really just first offense because they didn't actually understand or receive the warning. So it becomes somewhat of a circular argument. I'm not sure in practice that this would actually present a problem. Tom, your thoughts on that?
I'm not following you, Dan. What's wrong with saying that a first offense gets a warning and a second offense gets a fine?
The warning would have to be documented in some way that would be enforceable, so that there would be the ability to be challenged.
Well, it ought to be documented. That's all.
So I don't think in practice that this has actually been much of a problem. And then what this does do is it allows town administrator to be the determination of this, and they can designate. I'm not sure who they've currently delegated that authority to. I suspect it's probably the health agent. And again, they can grant a waiver to be reviewed, but I don't think any waivers are still in effect at this point. Last time I asked, there weren't any waivers that were still in effect. Any questions, thoughts? Has anyone heard of any issues with this bylaw at this point? I know there was some opposition, particularly to the bags. I think some of that has been has dissipated since the state has put in additional laws around paper bags and so forth to, again, encourage the use of reusable bags. Over the last several years, we've also seen increase in the usage of different types of delivery services, which has also changed some of the nature of how takeout and other foods that were commonly delivered in the single-use film bags were used. So it seems like the bylaw is actually working as intended. Changes, thoughts? Going once, going twice? Okay. With that, we have the new items that we had brought up briefly at the last meeting. I don't have any additional new information of substance on these, but I do have a little bit of additional information. So the vacant buildings bylaw, this is one that we briefly introduced at the last meeting. One of the questions that I wanted to bring to this meeting is whom you think we should introduce and invite to a meeting to have a more substantive discussion on the idea of the vacant buildings. It's certainly been an issue relatively recently. We saw the fire over in the building on Main Street, and there are more vacancies on Main Street and other commercial areas than we've had in many years. So it's something that we may want to discuss, but we may also want to make sure that this other stakeholders have time to review any potential changes and suggest changes before this issue potentially comes back to town meeting. So thoughts on vacant buildings?
So Dan, I'd recommend that we invite Brian McGrail. I think he spoke up at town meeting against such a bylaw in the past and was successful in shooting it down. He represents the bulk of businesses that would be concerned about it. He's also not a reflexively anti-town person by any means. He is donating his time very generously to representing the school department before the Zoning Board of Appeals in the past, and more recently on the public safety building. So I think he'd be a very good resource and might well be willing to spend some time with us.
Okay. Other suggestions? Eric?
This is way off the wall, but the people who empty buildings are used by the homeless, believe it or not. And so they might have some kind of stake in there. Now the question is, who speaks for them, and can they speak legibly? I don't mean legibly, I mean, proper words quickly. I'm just expanding the range of discussion. Thank you.
Okay. And in terms of to get representation, anyone who is homeless can register to vote if they are residing in town, whether they choose to and even have the knowledge to do so, that becomes somewhat of a potential barrier, but there's no cost, there's no harm in it. And obviously they can attend a meeting just as you do, Eric, then go to a library. So it's something that I have no objection to anyone else joining. If someone wants to give opinion, awesome. I'm not sure who in town would actually
Qualified,
be able
yeah.
to have more of a voice for them.
One point, what do the homeless use for a voting address?
Tom, you may
Well-
be able to address that.
No, I don't know.
Okay.
Okay, unknown. Next topic. Yeah.
So other people that would be valuable, so that this is an issue that we can have a more robust discussion, because again, it came up in the around 2017, 2018, in the committee at that time, went through, and Town Council Mullen spent a considerable amount of time getting it into a form that seems to have addressed most of the concerns that had been brought up. And if there are additional concerns, we want to have those identified and potentially addressed. And that way we can determine what should happen with the idea of the vacancies. Because to have the inspections, to have access to those properties on an increased basis certainly would increase safety, and in light of the tragedies that we've had, would not be a bad thing. In addition to increase the beautification. So-
Dan, I'm forgetting the term. But John Smolinski was president of the
Chamber of Commerce.
Chamber of Commerce. They represent certainly a lot of the businesses in downtown. So maybe the director of the Chamber of Commerce or president, whatever they call them, maybe a stakeholder.
There is the ability to potentially reach out to the various property owners, although that seems like it would be somewhat of a larger effort than may be necessary. I know some of the property owners live in town, a lot of them I know also don't. But they definitely have a stake in this, because they're the ones that would have to open up their properties or otherwise. If anyone wants to take that on, I'm certainly would be amenable to having people reach out to the various owners. Not seeing any takers. Any real estate agents in particular, or real estate firms that you'd recommend that focus on commercial? Most of the real estate firms I know of really are more residential, and they will do commercial only if it comes to them. Okay, I will take it. I will reach out to Mr. McGrail, reach out to the Chamber of Commerce. They're familiar with our committee, see if they can bring representatives as well. So next time we cover general bylaws, expect that we'll be reviewing chapter 155, or proposed chapter 155 on the vacancy. Short-term rentals. We didn't have much of a discussion last time. Wanted to present it again. These are rentals such as Vrbo and Airbnb. At the moment, there isn't really any sort of inclusion or exclusion. Several neighboring communities have put in some bylaws, oftentimes to do light regulation of properties that are used extensively for this purpose. So someone who does it for a couple of days a year, not a problem, but it's to limit the use as investment properties as a quasi hotel, and because that can reduce overall value in particular neighborhoods. I'm not saying that it has become a significant problem, although I know of a couple of properties in town that are used in that way, and wasn't sure if we wanted to head that off at the pass or not. About 5 years ago, the decision was made to basically not take action because it wasn't, it was a perceived problem more so than an actual one that needed action at that time. Where things have changed a little bit, wasn't sure what the committee would think of addressing the issue. There's a lot of different example bylaws that we could pull for language, and I'm quite confident that Attorney Mullen could send something to his colleagues out on the various listservs and get quite a bit of standard language. Thoughts?
So Dan, I don't know about standard language because you have to decide up front what you want to accomplish. I represent, for example, Linfield, which through its zoning bylaws forbids all short-term rentals in residential districts. Now, one thing you have to consider if you use the zoning bylaws is then you invite grandfathering. And we actually had a case that went to the SJC about whether someone who had been using his property as an Airbnb had achieved grandfather status in that and could continue to do so even after the change in the zoning bylaw. We were successful there, but if you use a non-zoning bylaw, a general bylaw, then there's no such thing as grandfathering. That might be then something we want to bring up with Bobrowski to see how he feels about putting it into the zoning bylaws. And but with him and with us, we have to face too the question: ought we to be doing this? You know, we're the bylaw review committee, and now we're talking about legislating something that's brand new. I just raised that as an issue. It seems to me it's equally applicable to the vacant buildings and the rodenticide usage.
It is. They're new bylaws. They're certainly within our scope that we can propose them, and that's part of the reason for doing the reach out. The purpose of bylaw review is to work with bylaws, but not policy, not to set other policies. So we're not going to tell town council what road policies should be. We would only work with the bylaws themselves. And the town council seems to be doing a fine job of making their own determinations around road policies and signs and things along those lines. I don't think they need any input from us on that. But the question of should we try to address it from a practical perspective, it's something that is being done in Wakefield. If you do a search, you will see properties that do get listed. I haven't heard that it's a particular concern, given the time that it takes to get a bylaw in place. It's something that we may want to figure out if there's parameters around that, or we can let sleeping dogs lie. So thoughts?
I
go ahead.
sorry, go ahead, Tim.
Yeah, I'd probably lean on the side if this hasn't been an issue in Wakefield, and there may be a few out there, to just let it lie unless there's a reason to necessarily move forward with the change.
I kind of on the same page. We did have an issue several years ago that before everyone knew about Airbnbs and Verbos, and it really was quite distracting to the neighborhood. And we addressed it. I forget how we addressed it. But I think it's a different time now. And if it's not an issue and we haven't heard anyone complain, I'm kind of in the let sleeping dogs lie category.
Others' thoughts? Eric, Lucy, Joe?
I agree with that approach.
I think we
Eric?
can wait on this. In other words, just not act.
Okay. And Joe?
Yeah, I agree with what was said there tonight. Yeah.
Okay, so with that one, I'm going to remove that from the agendas going forward. And unless it comes up in some other context, which again, if Attorney Bobrowski brings it up in a usage context, we'll address it at that time as a committee. And it may be that we just don't take action. One componentry that has been discussed in some communities is by treating it so that it's treated similar to hotels and others, and potentially making it eligible for the hotel tax, although that's not a significant revenue piece for the town. So just mentioning those pieces, but for now, as an independent issue, I think that we'll just let that one stay as is. For the rodenticide issue, I have been in touch with Arlington. There things get a little bit interesting. And the concerns that we brought up last time, I brought over to Arlington. I've not heard back as to the cost differential, which is what I've requested to know what the costs were before based upon the chemical rodenticides versus the non-chemical rodenticides that they're now using. So we'd have an idea of what the costs are in a community. Just getting the numbers it isn't meaningful without the scope of what the numbers were before. It's a different enough community and topology that we'd want to be able to make a relative comparison. So I've requested that information. I've also requested how they're measuring the efficacy of the change in policy. The bylaw that was passed was ultimately rejected by the Attorney General based upon that it was overly broad. And it didn't isolate things just to the public property areas. And so the Attorney General rejected it as it was submitted. They found that to be in conflict. And it's not a fatal defect to the concept. It was just fatal to that particular implementation. In Arlington, the town took the concept and built it into policy. So they actually do have a policy that no town properties are permitted to have SGAR types of rodenticides. So they're not allowed to have the anticoagulants, which are the rodenticides that do get absorbed by those that are killed. I also talked to some of the pest control people from a variety of companies, and what they have said is that it really depends a lot on which formulation is used as to how much and how fast it gets metabolized by the rodent and how much gets picked up by secondary predators. And they do recommend that if we take any action, we also advocate to the state to have that action also affect private property, because just taking action on the public property is a small part of the problem. A big part of it is the poisons that people can buy from places like Home Depot and Lowe's and just spread on their property. It's unfortunately not uncommon for people to buy like Decon and spread it out on their property. And when rodents eat that, then all of a sudden they become fodder for raptors, the raptors and other animals. A lot of those poisons are not regulated, and they can cause real problems in the ecosystem. So we're still waiting to hear back on the official usage, but there is precedent for doing this. So if there's any other concerns or questions, happy to pass those along so that we have we can have a discussion based upon data and have a position of strength. In addition, the Audubon Society is following this issue, and they are happy to contribute information as well. Questions, thoughts, issues? If we can change human behavior to not have areas that are conducive to rodents, that would help a lot. Fortunately, we don't have quite as much of a problem at the moment as some other communities do. But this may change, especially around the high schools as the construction commences over there. That tends to create a lot of disruption for rodents that are living in nature, and rodents will then search out. They'll search out homes, and the homes that are close to those areas, if there's any openings, the rodents will find them.
Dan, question for now though, for the public ways, they have to be in lock boxes and stuff like that, right? That rodent control? Or is there no law for that, or is there a law for that?
It depends on who is distributing it. If it's distributed by pest control, it's heavily regulated. If it's distributed in a private way, it's unregulated.
So we don't have any law on that, or do we?
We don't have any local bylaws that cover it.
Yeah, all right. So that's why we're discussing. All right.
The chemicals that are currently being used are pretty significant. The EPA has a lot of warnings on them, such as they should not be in places where rain can get to them because they're water activated, and it becomes incredibly dangerous. So
Normally they're in those rat traps, basically, right? That they can only go in them and they're locked in there, and then they eat it and they leave, and right.
that's the idea behind it. Once the rat eats it, the rat doesn't die immediately.
Yeah.
It's an anticoagulant, sometimes referred to as a blood thinner. So what it does is it prevents the metabolism of vitamin K, and so the rodent and any animal that ingests that rodent will literally bleed out through the various organs. So because the blood doesn't have the ability to clot anymore, whether there's a sore or not anywhere that the blood can seep, it will. It's a very, very painful death.
Yeah, no, I understand.
And while I'm not a lover of rats and rodents, I do have an appreciation for the circle of life, and they become they become food for and are prey. They're food for other parts of the life cycle. So we've got a lot of raptors that are around. We've got coyotes and other bigger animals that do help to control them.
And Dan, what did you say? Did you say whether there is like any interest in like fully making it not an option for public spaces? Like,
there's definitely interest in it that I've seen. I've talked to quite a few people that are mostly that are interested in wildlife, that are particularly concerned about this issue.
Yeah.
And that's where the issue came up. And I wouldn't necessarily label the people as strong environmentalists. It was more that they are more wildlife advocates. They tend to do a lot around birds and others that are predators to the rodents. So while mice and rats tend to creep most of us out when we see them, they are part of the life cycle.
Are there any other initiatives well, this is maybe not directly related to a bylaw, but if there are other initiatives like related to climate or sustainability, I think that this is like also part of a broader set of interests. I was at a conference actually in DC last week, and this exact thing came up, and like they were speaking about how they were implementing other solutions specifically to like remove the use of this agent in as like pest management. So I'm I feel like there's definitely potential to like have momentum around it. I just don't fully understand what our options are from this committee, like what our role is.
So great question. The pieces that I can answer is we just talked about chapter 192, which is on environmental. It's environmentally driven for the sustainable food containers and
Right.
packaging. And so it's related in concept to that. It's putting the environment as a part of our governance. The other initiatives, I know the Board of Health does have some regulations around pest management, but we're limited to bylaws. And an issue that changes how people act tends to be something that needs to be determined by a body politic. In our case, that would be town meeting.
Right.
So if that helps a little bit.
Yeah, and again, I know we talked about this last time we met and we're talking about it now, but is there already an existing bylaw that around this that we would change, or are we trying to create a new one that addresses that? Or would there need to be something that happens prior to there being a bylaw around this?
Great question. Tom, are you aware of any of the bylaws in Wakefield that this would attach to?
I don't think that we have any pesticide related bylaws, and actually in the past I would have been nervous about approaching them for fear that I'd be dealing with something that's preempted by state or federal law. The one thing this does remind me of is we have a bylaw I was surprised to learn a lot of people care about. It's one forbidding steel jaw leg traps. When I say I was surprised, I thought, well, of course we shouldn't have steel jaw leg traps. That's cruel and it's gross, it's disgusting. But I couldn't believe how many people turned out at town meeting talking about how much fun they derive from catching small animals.
I'm speechless.
Yeah.
Welcome to the underbelly of Wakefield.
Yeah.
Lucy, does that kind of address your question?
Yeah, I guess I just am not clear on what our action is in
In this-
relation to this specific issue.
So if we take action, it would probably be in two different ways. One would be creating a bylaw similar to vacant buildings, which we have the ability to do, that would realistically in the short term prohibit the use of S-jars, S-cars as they're known, which are the types of pesticides that cause the problem. And the second part would be to then advocate for a home rule petition that would allow for a more general bylaw in the future.
Got it. Thank you. That's very helpful.
Other thoughts? Joe, Eric, and Tim?
I think it's an important issue and we should be prepared to act if it's a meaningful way to do it. Sometimes you have to wait for the public. But we certainly we should be alert, and I think this is time well spent.
Dan, should we talk to Bobrowski about this and just bring it up as a side note? See what I mean, he's been in a million other towns, so I'm sure he's got a little bit of knowledge on this.
Well, I didn't quite catch that.
Talk to Bob on this, Bobrowski. And maybe, I mean, he's been through this on other towns, so I mean, I'm sure he can answer it in about 3 seconds if it's a place to go, or should we just stay away from it? I mean, you know what I'm saying?
We can certainly bring it up to Attorney Bobrowski. I think that makes a lot of sense. Tom, I know you also work with a lot of communities. Are you aware, other than Arlington, of any communities that have tried to tackle this issue?
No, I'm not, and by all means, let's ask Mark. He's a smart guy. I just point out that his area is zoning. Okay, so I don't know how much experience he has with other towns in connection with the general bylaws, and that's what this would be.
So we can certainly ask it. Eric?
Well, there were all the advocacy organizations that see contributions. And
So
whether or
the
not-
Audubon Society's already reached out, as well as a few
Okay.
other organizations, because
Okay,
they've asked, what they can do to help and provide information. I've told them at the moment I'm waiting on information from Arlington, just so that we have municipal to municipal
yep,
communication that's
okay.
open, and we have something based upon, at least, even though it has been enforced too long, something based upon a similar town that is in practice, as opposed to just a dream. Once we have that information, I think that they will probably be useful to helping communicate the messaging.
Okay.
That's my expectation from where I sit. So thoughts?
I think it's good to just keep it moving. I think like while it can be understood in the context of wildlife, I think it's important to keep in mind that it's like contributing to our own ecosystem as humans also. And so there are like just health considerations that we should be thinking about in knowing that like the poisons don't just go away when they are thrown away. So I'm all about it.
Well put. Life is fragile, whether it's rodent or human. Okay, so this is one that will continue on. This brings us to upcoming dates. So, as I mentioned earlier, Attorney Bobrowski is available for Monday, November 20th. He is not available for the regularly scheduled meetings that we would have potentially on October 16th and November 6th. He has other commitments on those. October 16th, I believe, is a planned date for the town council. That's CIL. So I'm not sure, Tom, if that's accurate, then I'm going to speculate you're probably not available.
Yeah, that would be right.
So that would give us potentially a conflict if we wanted to move potentially to the 17th, which would be a Tuesday. Alternatively, we could consider the 5th Monday, which is not a holiday this year. That's October 30th. And that would be to continue on with the general bylaws if we want. And then we could the following week is November 6th, which would be the standing first Monday meeting. So I wasn't sure what people's schedules looked like for preferences on that.
I would prefer November 6th, just based on my schedule.
For
That
me.
looks great for me.
Other thoughts? So we've got 3 for November 6th. Tom, are you available as far as you know?
I think so, yes.
Okay.
I can do that. That's fine.
Okay. So with that, it looks like we've got a quorum. Eric, were you okay for November 6th?
I'm okay for anything. Yeah.
So
Well, I don't have other conflict.
your next meeting is tomorrow morning, 6 a.m. And
Oh, I sleep tonight. Yeah. Okay.
sorry, details. Okay, but so November 6th, which is Monday, will be our next meeting, 7 p.m. And the following day would be election day, although I don't believe that that's occurring this particular year, being I don't think there's any election happening for that. There are two other dates to be aware of. So, or three other dates. So November 6th will be general bylaw. November 20th will be on zoning. So for preparation for that. The other dates to be aware of, which are also on the agenda, Indigenous Peoples Day, sometimes also referred to as Columbus Day, is next Monday, October 9th. I recommend that people go ahead and really learn about the day, learn the various histories of what the day means and how it can be used. A lot of us grew up with it just being a day off and not really understanding the meanings behind it. And I'm not saying that with any sort of agenda other than learning. There's a lot that happens as to why it's a holiday, what it can be used for, what it can mean, and a lot of great information out there. It's a day that can be used for learning. Highly recommend it, especially if you don't have to work. That becomes a useful item. There's quite a few events that are happening around town as well. And then town meeting has been set for Saturday, November 18th. And I know that it's what we all want to do on a Saturday morning. I believe it starts at 9 a.m. So get up nice and bright and early and go over to the Galvin. But Saturday, November 18th, which is the Saturday before our meeting, and also it's the Saturday before Thanksgiving. So that will be the annual town meeting that happens. We do not currently have anything that we are planning to present at that town meeting. I haven't seen the warrant proposals. Once the warrant is closed, we'll get to see what's on it. And if you're not going to be at that meeting, please send me an email with the reason for it, just to be consistent with the requirement that you have in our charter that all town officers are at the town meeting. So as long as there's a reason for it, if someone should ask, I've never been asked, but if someone should ask, I could state that this is what the reason is, and as long as it is something that is realistic, it'll be deemed a valid reason, and that's the only requirement by the charter itself. Anything else? Anything that people would like to bring up?
Dan, I'll send you an email, but I think that's the last. I may be going to see my son play hockey in a tournament, and it's the last time I will ever see him play after 20-ish years of paying for it. So his college career is ending. So I will be gone on that weekend. And then we're flying to Ireland on the 20th, but I think I'll be able to come to the meeting via Zoom at Dublin because our flight is so late.
If you're able to join us, we'd love to have you. If you're not able to join us, please have a pint in our honor. So
I will have many of them, I think.
Then you're having them not just in our honor, you're having them on our behalf. Those are completely different.
Yeah, my daughter's studying at Trinity for the semester, so we're going to head over. But I will send you an email. Thank you. Okay, appreciate it. Wish your son best of success. And last I heard, the Bruins were looking for some players, so one never knows. Maybe the career has a possibility of continuing, but please enjoy. Wish him the very, very best and have a great time. I'll talk to you separately as my daughter may be interested in Trinity as well. Oh, good. So one of my daughters. Any other issues? Anything else coming up? Okay, with that, thank you all for joining. I appreciate your time. Nice short meeting. And with that, the purpose of the next meeting will be to go over at this point. I expect that we will be discussing vacant buildings. We may have language for rodenticide. I'm going to see what I can get from Arlington on that. And if we have any of the updated language, if Tom's able to get to it by then, we'll talk about that. If not, then I'm sure that will be ready sometime over the winter. Tom, that becomes your assignment for the few updates that have been previously requested.
So we can talk about that. Otherwise, is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, Lucy makes a motion to adjourn. And seconds, Joe, you got those down?
Yeah.
Excellent. So with that, we're going to take any discussion on the motion to adjourn? Objections? Okay, we'll take a roll call vote on this in the order in which you appear on the screen. Joe,
Yes.
Lucy,
Yeah.
Tim,
Yes.
Ann,
Yes.
Eric,
Yes.
Tom, if you'd like to vote, even though it won't count, you're welcome to.
I vote aye.
Okay.
What vote today?
I know it's been a long time since you got to vote in something, where it was significant in these types of meetings. So we've got an honorary vote of aye from Tom. I'll vote in the affirmative. And with that, the meeting's adjourned at 8:12. Thank you, everyone. Appreciate it. And we'll have to talk about college and all that fun stuff.
Wonderful. All right. Take care.